Hi everyone, my name is Giovanna Proença, and today we're going to talk about Mario More problem set 1 of CS50. In this problem, we have to create a pattern specific this way in here. So we're going to receive a number of height, and we have to display this pattern here where we have the left and the right pyramid. And we have a couple of requirements to do before we're able to manipulate this pattern. We're going to see each step at a time, don't worry, but it's important for us to highlight some things for now. The first thing we're going to highlight is, so we have two steps in our code. The first one will get the height and check if we're receiving the correct number for the height. And then once we know what is the height, we're going to create the pattern. So for now, let's work with the height part. So in here, we're going to ask the user for a positive integer, okay, to be the height. And this positive integer should be, actually must be, in the range of 1 to 8. So we're going to accept numbers from 1 to 8 to be our pattern. In here we have 8, so we have this pattern, 4, we have this pattern, 1. If we have a number that is less than 1 or greater than 8, we won't accept. So how can we implement this? So first, we need to get the height. So let's see these patterns that we have in here. If the user type in 3, we have to create this pyramid where we have 3 rows. If we have height 8, we have to create this pyramid where we have 8 rows. 2, it's gonna have 2 rows. And for example, if the user type in -1, we're gonna reprompt the user. If the user type in 0, we're gonna reprompt the user. 42 reprompt, 50 reprompt, until the user gives us the correct value. So for example, in here, the user is giving us 4, so we're printing 4 rows for our pyramid. Now that we have a general idea of what we're going to do, let's start implementing here in our code. So you're going to click here in VS Code, and you should have done all the setup for the environment. If not, you can watch our video explaining all the steps you have to do to have here your VS Code connected with CS50 so you can get the grade for every project. And after you have this done, you have to go here and we're able to download the file that CS50 is asking to us. So you're going to copy here and paste in your terminal, and you're going to follow all of this: unzip, rm, and then cd mario, so then you're able to see this file we're seeing right now. That is just a regular mario.c file where we contain here the header, the libraries we're going to import, and the main function. I'm going to create a variable here that will be called height. Okay, so it will be an integer, height. And then we're going to use the while loop. If you remember from the lecture, we can use multiple types of loops, but the while loop is really important for us in this case because we're going to do some part of the code, we're going to do some things while our expression is true. Once our expression is false, we won't be doing this anymore. And what we're going to do, we're going to ask the user for a height. So I'm going to say height equals, and if you remember from the lecture, how can we get the input, how can we prompt the user for something? We can use the getInt function that is inside of our CS50 library. So here I'm going to say getInt, and I want to ask for the height. Okay. Then we need to set what is our condition. So I want to ask the user for this, for the height, while we don't have the correct number for height. So here, while height is less than or equals to 0. Remember that we only want numbers between 1 and 8 inclusive. Or height is greater than 8. Okay, so this is our test in here. So let's check. If I do here make Mario, and then I do /Mario, it's going to ask us for height. If I put here -1, it's asking us again because -1 is a number that is less than 1. If I put here 9, for example, 9 is greater than 8, so it's asking us again. What if I put 100? It will ask us the user again, because here we're going to do this block of getInt while we're not satisfying this condition. What if I put the number 4? 4 is a number that is in the range of 1 and 8, and we should be done with that. So if I put here enter, we're done with our do while loop, and then we're satisfying the first part of our code. So this is it. Now let's start thinking about how can we create the pattern for our pyramid. As I mentioned previously, we have this pattern here we have to follow according to the height. Now, instead of doing everything once, I want to break this pattern into 2 parts. For now, we're going to understand how can we implement the left part of the pyramid, and then we're going to understand how can we implement the right part. So now we're going to spend a couple of time working in the left part, and in a bit, once we complete this, we're going to run the debugger and see how it works. Then, once you have all of these concepts in your mind, we're going to see then how can we implement the right part. So let's start thinking here, how can we implement this left part here of our pyramid. So now we need to think about how can we create the pattern. So let's suppose we have this example here where height is equals to 5. Here we're seeing that we're only seeing the right part of our pyramid. We can't see the left part because in the left part we have the empty spaces. So let's put this pyramid in a table. Let's suppose that we have here this table where we have 5 columns and 5 rows. Now instead of letting these empty spaces, let's put some dots instead. Here, as we can see, in the first row we have 4 dots and 1 hash. In the second row, we have 3 dots and 2 hashes. In the third row, we have 2 dots and 3 hashes. In the fourth row, we have 1 dot and 4 hashes. And in the last row, we have no dots and 5 hashes. So if you take a look, the number of the row that we are, it's how many hashes we're going to print out. And as we can see, as long as we are going in our table from the first row to the last one, the number of hashes are increasing and the number of dots, or white spaces, are decreasing. So we have to find a rule to understand how it works. Now let's analyze the first row only and see if we find a formula to print out the dots and the hashes. One thing that is important to notice, every time we're working with programming, we always start counting at 0. So the first row we're going to be calling is at 0. And the last row, since we're starting at 0 and our height is 5, it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay? So let's analyze the first row, that it's our I equals to 0. And our columns will be called j. When I is equals to 0 in the first row, we can take a look at j equals to 0. And here in this position, we have a dot. Then when we have I equals to 0 and j equals to 1, we have a dot again. Then I equals to 0 and j equals to 2, we have another dot. Then we have I equals to 0, j equals to 3, another dot. And finally, we find a hash when our I is equals to 0 and j is equals to 4. So what we can observe about this, our height has value 5. The only moment where we have a hash is when our j is equals to 4 and our I is equals to 0. The other scenarios, we can't see this. So what if we see that the observation when we are summing I plus j? So in the first scenario, we have I equals to 0 and j equals to 0, I plus j is equals to 0, and 0 is less than 4. That it's height minus 1. For I equals to 1 and for I equals to 0 and j equals to 1, we have here 0 plus 1 equals to 1, and 1 is less than 4. Then we have I equals to 0, j equals to 2, that is equals to 2, and 2 is less than 4. And so on until we have here this part where we have the hash, that it's I equals to 0 and j equals to 4. 0 plus 4 is 4, and 4 is equals to our height minus 1. So we can kind of see this formula starting out. Now let's see the second row. What if in here, now the second row, I is equals to 1. So I equals to 1 is 1 and j equals to 0, so I plus j is 1 and 1 is less than 4. Then I equals to 1, j equals to 1, we have 2 and 2 is less than 4. I equals to 1, j equals to 2, it's 3 and 3 is less than 4. And notice that when we have I equals to 1 and j equals to 3, the sum is 4. We have a hash. So this kind of respects our formula that we notice. And then when we have I equals to 1 and j equals to 4, that it's 5, when we sum them, we also have a hash. So we can start seeing that in here, this might be our way to calculate when we're going to print out the dots and when we're going to print out the hashes, okay? This will be our main formula. If I plus j is less than n minus 1, we're going to print a dot. If I plus j is greater than or equals to height minus 1, we're going to print out a hash. Okay, so let's save this formula to use in the future. Now that we saw this pattern of printing the hashes, how can we put this into code? We're going to start working with nested loops. Let's remember that table that we were seeing before where we have the rows and the columns. And again, we're working with that example where the height is 5, okay? So if we're working with nested loops, we need to loop through the rows and the columns in order to display or the dot or the hash, because now we know that depending on which row and which column we are, we're gonna print out something different, correct? So how can we loop first in the rows? We can do our for loop, looping from 0 to 5, that is our height. And this way we're gonna loop from 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is our I. Then, if we want to loop through the rows, we need to do a for loop inside this for loop of the I, because this for loop of the I will do the following. First, we're going to loop over the first row, the row 0, and then we're going to check in this row 0 all the 5 columns we have inside. Once we finish looping through these columns, we're going to go to the next row and loop for all the other columns again, and so on. So this is pretty good because we can check each square we have here in our table, in this table where we have the rows and the columns. So our first for loop will loop from 0 0 to the height, and then our second for loop will loop again from 0 to the height because we are in a square. We have both I and j going from 0 to 4, okay? And then, instead of our for loop, we're going to do an if statement, checking exactly that golden formula we found. If I plus j is less than the height minus 1, we're going to display the dot. If I plus j is greater or equals to our n minus 1, that is our height minus 1, we're going to display the hash. And then by the end, since we want to print the rows and the columns, we're going to go to the next line. So we need to force our print to go to the next line. Okay, so how can we convert this that I just said and you saw here in the screen, in this animation, into words? So let's see here in our code. So far we have here our do while loop, okay? And now we're gonna start doing our nested for loop. So here I'm gonna do for int I equals to 0, and as I mentioned, we're gonna start from 0 to the value of our height, I less than height, I plus plus. This is our first for loop to loop through the rows. And now we're gonna do a second for loop inside to loop through the columns. Let me shrink this part and expand in here. And then I'm gonna do for int j equals to 0. And again, since it's a square, we're gonna loop through from 0 to our height again. J less than height and j plus plus. All right, once we have this, now we need to use our golden formula as I mentioned. So we're gonna do an if and else statement. So here, if I plus j is less than height minus 1, we're gonna print out our dot. Oops, print f our dot. Else, we're gonna print f our hash. In the future, we will remove this dot, but right now I wanna show you what is going on, okay? And finally, as I mentioned, this for loop here will print out all the hashes and dots we have in the first row. Then we need to go to the next row and do all over again. So after our inner for loop, we're going to do a print f and we're gonna go to the next line. So \n. Okay, let's see if it's working. We probably have some bugs, but it's okay. So here make Mario, and here ./Mario, and let's test again if the first part is working. So if I put -1, it's asking us again, 9, it's asking us again, but what if I put 5? And here in 5, let me expand here, let me zoom in, and we can see what is going on. So here, when we have height 5, we're doing here 4 dots and 1 hash, like we are expecting. Then 3 dots, 2 hashes. 2 dots, 3 hashes, 1 dot, 4 hashes, and finally 0 dots and 5 hashes. Okay, so here we have our pattern. The only thing we need to fix to be exactly what we're expecting is instead of having a dot, we're gonna put a space, a white space. So let me make